All right, so today we're learning section 6.3. We're still talking about the trig functions, okay? That's the main idea of what we're doing. We're doing sine, cosine, tangent, all that good stuff. Um, not as much heavy on the unit circle today, but we're doing the same concepts. The first thing we're talking about, and the theme of today is plus or minus signs. Which is it going to be? Is it going to be positive or negative? And every question, the most difficult part about it is understanding whether it's plus or minus. Okay, so keep that in mind. So let's look at this chart real quick. If I were to talk about sine or cosecant, which letters are we talking about when we talk about sine and cosecant? Y and R. And today we are talking about sines, right? So it's either Y, don't write this down, Y over R or R over Y, right? What's going to be true about your R every time? 1, or in general, it's going to be positive. Okay, so if I'm talking about sine and cosecant, I'm really thinking about Y. It's either Y or it's 1 over Y, okay, if we're on the unit circle. So sine and cosecant, we're thinking Y. If we're looking at a unit circle, in which quadrants is your Y going to be positive? 1 and 2. Because think about what you're doing. You're doing Y values, right? This is just a graph. Don't forget that. This is a graph. If you have a positive Y value, you go up, right? So I'm going up from it. Oh, it's in quadrants 1 and 2. Okay, so which quadrants is sine going to be negative? 3 and 4. Because if I'm doing negative Y values, I'm going down. Finish that chart with your neighbors. Go. So if we are talking about cosine and secant, Sam, okay, what are we thinking about with cosine and secant? X. And which quadrant is your X going to be positive? First and fourth. First and fourth quadrant. Oh, that's a fifth quadrant. First and fourth quadrant, because I want the X to be positive. Yeah, if I go to the right, my X is going to be positive. So obviously I'm negative in quadrants 2 and 3. When I go to the left, my X is negative. Lovely. If we're talking about tangent and cotangent, Jack, what are we talking about with tangent and cotangent? X and Y. And he said both of them, right? It's both. Whether it's Y over X or X over Y, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but I'm looking at both of them. Which quadrant is your Y and your X when you make a fraction? Is it going to be positive? 1 and 3. What is true if tangent or cotangent is positive? What has to be true about Y and X? Same sign. They gotta be the same sign. Okay. Whether they're both positive, yeah, that gets you a positive. Or it's a negative number divided by a negative number. Oh yeah, that will get me positive as well. Okay. So when is it going to be negative? In quadrants 2 and 4. Because what is happening in 2 and 4? What is true about X and Y? Different signs. One of them is negative. If you are dividing things and one of them is negative, it is going to be negative. Does that make sense? So if we wrote that on our unit circle here, what is positive in the first quadrant? Which trig function is positive in the first quadrant? All of them. Everything is positive in the first quadrant because your x's and y's are both positive. Which trig function is going to be positive in your second quadrant? Just sine. We can do cosine. I'm just talking about the base one. So just sine. Sine is the only one that is positive in the second quadrant. What's the only thing that's going to be positive in the third quadrant? Tangent. Tangent's the only one that's positive. And which one's going to be positive in the fourth quadrant? Cosine. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. You can do different things with that. Some pre-calc teachers, when I talk to them, they love having students memorize that. I do not like that. That doesn't help me. I would much rather look at X's and Y's and think my way through it. But if you want to memorize it, memorize it. Okay? There is a phrase here to remind that it's all of them are positive: sine, tangent, cosine. ASTC. ASTC. The phrase is all students take calculus. That is the lamest sentence of all time. All right, that doesn't help me. I don't enjoy it. I like something that makes me giggle. That doesn't make me giggle. That's nothing. All right. My challenge to you is to come up with a better phrase. ASTC. If you come up with a phrase that is the best in the class, you come in tomorrow and you tell me your phrase and it's better than everybody else's, I'll give you a bonus point. Here we go. Let's play the trig puzzle game. I like these problems. They're silly, but they make me think, and I like it. The trig puzzle game. Here's what it is. They're giving you 2 clues, and based off of those 2 clues, you need to decide which quadrant are they describing. So let's look. The first one says sine is greater than 0. So you can do like the all students take calculus thing if you would like to. I don't do that. Okay? When we think sine, what does sine mean? Y over r, and my radius is always positive. So it's my y has to be greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, that means positive. Which direction am I moving if my y is positive? Up. So the 2 quadrants I'm looking for are 1 and 2. Okay? We could have made that decision. Yeah, all of them in 1 and sine in 2. Yeah, same thing. Cool. That's the first clue. Here's the second clue. Cosine is less than 0. What's cosine mean? X over r, so it's just x is negative. Which direction are we going if x is negative? Left. Which quadrant is true for both the first clue and the second clue? 2. The answer to the clue to the mystery game is quadrant 2. Makes sense as to what we're doing. It's simple, but it's different. Here we go, next one. Sine is less than 0. So sine is less than 0, then point. Which direction are you going if your sine is less than 0? Down, because that means y is negative. Boom. Boom. Point. Which direction are you going if secant is greater than 0? Point. Which direction are you going if secant is greater than 0? To the right, because secant goes with x is positive. If my x is positive, I'm in those 2 quadrants. Which one are both of them true in? 4. Good there on B. Super. Try C and D. I didn't give you the quadrants already drawn. It's very simple to draw a quadrant. Try C and D with your neighbors. See what you can do. Go. Show me with your fingers. What do you think on C? What do you think on C? We've got some 2s and 4s. Let's do it. If I'm doing cosecant is less than 0. Matt, what are we looking for? Or Matthew, what are we looking for if it's cosecant? The y. If I'm less than 0, then I'm negative. So which direction did you go if your y is negative? The bottom. Good. We're doing cotangent. If we're talking cotangent here, Aaron H., what does cotangent tell us? X and y. We're looking at both of them, and it's less than 0. That means it's negative. So what has to be true about x and y if I'm trying to get a negative answer? Opposite signs. X and y are different signs. That's what we know. X and y have to be different signs. In which 2 quadrants are x and y different signs? 2 and 4. Because this quadrant, they're both positive. This quadrant, they're both negative. They're different signs in those 2. So my answer here is 4. Let's look at D. Show me with your fingers. Which one did you get? What did you get on D? It's 1. It's pretty easy on this one because they're both positive. The only place where everything is going to be positive is in quadrant 1. Cosine is greater than 0. That means x is positive. So I'm going to the right. Tangent is greater than 0 means x and y, same sign. Okay, it's y over x. But it's the same sign, so that's quadrant 1 and 3. The only one that they overlap is 1. Questions on those? Flip it to the back side. On the back side, it looks new. It's exactly what we've been doing. The only tricky part about these ever are signs. You got to pay attention. Where's it positive? Where's it negative? Okay, so here's what they gave us. They told me cosine is this, and the angle lies in the 3rd quadrant. They don't tell you stuff that you're not going to use. So if they tell you you're in the 3rd quadrant, you better underline it or make sure you don't forget it. Okay, don't forget that part. Our job in the end is to find tangent and sine. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what tangent of theta is. I'm trying to figure out what sine of theta is. Anytime I'm trying to find trig values, we're finding the exact value. Okay, we are thinking x, y, and r. So we're going to start off here with x, y, r. Anybody got an idea of how we can come up with x, y, or r based off of what they told me? Cosine. Cosine of theta is negative 9/10. Well, what does cosine mean? X over r. So that means my x is 9 and my r is 10. There's a negative sign there. Are they both negative? No, because what happens if they're both negative? It'd be a positive answer. So they're not both negative. One of them is negative. Which one is going to be negative, the x or the r? The x value. The r is never negative. R is a measurement of a radius. R is always positive. Cool, I've got my x and my r. How could I find my y? Pythagorean Theorem, x squared plus y squared equals r squared. You don't need a calculator for that. Negative 9 squared. I'm not going to write the negative because what happens every time you square something? It's positive. Don't forget that. Okay, somebody's going to mess that up on our next quiz. Okay, 81 plus y squared is 100. Subtract 81. Y squared is 19. So what is y going to be equal to? It's going to be plus or minus. When I take a square root, it is plus or minus square root of 19. We don't know. It's not going to be both. It's either going to be positive or negative. It's another mystery. We need another clue. We're in quadrant 3. So using that clue of being in quadrant 3, what do you think is going to be true about y? Is it going to be positive or negative? Negative, because in quadrant 3, my y value is negative. Everybody good there? Once we've done that, it's just filling in the blanks. All right, I'm doing tangent. Tangent is y over x. So my y is negative radical 19. My x is negative 9. So my answer is radical 19 all over 9. Once you get your x, y, and r, it's just the same thing we do every time. Sine of theta. If I'm doing sine of theta, sine means y over r. So if I'm doing y over r, it's negative radical 19 all over 10. Done. Questions on A. Let's do it on B. Find your x, y, and r on letter B without me. So as I look at this thing, cosine of theta is negative radical 13 over 2. So Abby, if cosecant of theta is negative radical 13 over 2, what is that telling us here? Good. R is radical 13 and your y? Negative 2. Because we know one of them has to be negative. It can't be my r, so it's got to be my y. Once I've done that, to find my missing one, I do Pythagorean Theorem. So x squared plus 2 squared is radical 13 squared. What is radical 13 squared going to get me? 13. So x squared is 9. So x is going to be plus or minus 3. I need another clue to make sure whether it's plus or minus 3. So I look at this thing. Tangent is greater than 0. If tangent is greater than 0, what is that telling you? They're the same sign. Y and x are the same sign. So what is my 3 going to be? Is it going to be positive or negative here? It's got to be negative because I already know my y is negative because Abby told me it was because of this right here. So that means my x has to be negative as well. Then I'm doing it. Secant is r over x. Cotangent is x over y. Try letter C. Be careful on your signs on C. C is the toughest one. Do it. Oh, I forgot to do this. All right. So my x is 1, my y is 2. I did Pythagorean Theorem to find my r. It's always going to be positive. But don't forget about that second clue. Cosecant is less than 0. What does cosecant mean? My y, if I'm less than 0, what is that true about my y? Oh, okay, my y is negative based on that right there. Great. But wait, there's more. What else is that going to tell me? By making my y negative, I have to do something else as well. My x has to be negative. Tell your neighbor, why does your x also have to be negative? My x has to also be negative because of this right here. My cotangent is positive, which is great. You just see it and it doesn't do anything for you. But if cotangent is positive, what does that really tell you about your x and your y? They're the same sign. And so they could both be positive or negative. You got to pay attention to that. When I do cosine, I'm going to get negative radical 5 all over 5. And tangent is 2. It's not going to